This is Vote Her In, a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive. On this special weekend edition of Vote Her In, we speak with Laura Murphy. Enjoy. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly, and you're listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest for this special weekend edition. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and glad to be here, notwithstanding these very difficult times. But for all of you who are listening, it's a very special occasion for us today. We're going to be chatting with a dear friend of mine, Laura Murphy, who has had a very distinguished career, which we're going to talk a lot about today. But what we thought was that, among other things, Laura began her career working for that fabulous presidential candidate, that woman, Shirley Chisholm. And we thought it would be good on this weekend to have a little bit of a celebration of her leadership and something to look back at and forward to as women continue to think about the presidency. So welcome, Laura, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rebecca and Kelly.
So we're so glad to have Laura here to talk with us. And there's a lot of wonderful aspects to her story and what she's done politically and the way she's led. But we thought if Laura, you could begin by sharing with our listeners how you got into this kind of a career and kept at it, and for sure how you started working with Shirley Chisholm and what you learned from her while you were working with her.
I grew up in a middle-class African-American family in Baltimore, Maryland, and my parents were radicals for their class. My father was a lawyer, my mother, they were both college educated, and, they were both very well-read. And my father came from a relatively prosperous family, and my mother came from a family of educators, and they both ran for political office, and so did my two older brothers. And so there have been a total of 14 runs for political office in my immediate family, starting at the age of around 7. I was the youngest of 5, and only 2 of those campaigns were successful. But one of the interesting things is that when my mother first ran for city council, he put an ad in the paper using my picture where I was in this ad saying, "I'm too young to vote, but please vote for my mother, Madeline Murphy, for city council." And I didn't know she used my picture, and I found out through my classmates. And I said, "Mom, is my picture in the paper?" And she said, "Yes." And I'm like, "How dare you use my picture without asking me?" I was a precocious person, but I was very interested in politics, and I was dragged going door to door, registering people to vote. I went to political fundraising dinners. I was exposed, and at the age of 15, I co-chaired a group of teenagers called the Strike Force. And we went to different neighborhoods. I had a co-chair who could drive. I was, too young to drive. But we would go to different neighborhoods, play loud music in the back of his dad's station wagon, give out soft drinks, and ask people if they were registered to vote, and give them campaign literature and tell them about the candidates. And that year, my father won for a citywide judgeship, and then the first African-American to win a congressional seat in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, Perrin Mitchell won. And so, I've been an activist all of my life. I've been in student government, at Wellesley College. I was head of the Black Student Union. And, so when I got out of college, I was able to get a job working for Perrin Mitchell. And as wonderful as Perrin Mitchell was, when I told him that I didn't think I was being paid the same as the male legislative assistants, he told me, "You're not, and that's because one day you'll get married and a man will take care of you."
Oh, my goodness.
And this other person who shall be nameless, is trying to start a family, and he needs more money than you do. And, I said, I love this guy, but I can't work here under those circumstances. And Shirley Chisholm had this rocking, practically all female staff in positions. There were very few female chiefs of staff and legislative directors on. She had women in all of those positions. And so when a position opened up working for her, I leapt at it, and I just fell in love with her, and she was such a wonderful role model to me. So that's the abbreviated version, but I feel like I'd been working almost over a decade in politics, just not getting paid because I was young.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned this just as an aside, because I was thinking when you and I were talking the other day and trying to figure out how long ago it was when we met, which we decided was when you were at the ACLU in California. I then reflected on the fact, listening to you just now, that like you, I had a very political family, and I think that's true for some of our listeners. Of course, not all, but it's certainly a great way to just get in there, albeit as a volunteer, right?
Yeah, or as forced labor.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
You, of course, have worked for a long time on civil liberties and worked after 9/11 on, making sure that civil liberties stayed in place when we had things like the Patriot Act. There's a lot of parallels to right now, national crisis, potential loss of civil liberties. Certainly one of the things that people have talked about doing to trace the virus is, cell phone data, where people are going, things like that. So talk to us some about kind of the lessons of 9/11, what we can think about today, how we balance those things between national interest and individual interest.
Yeah. So listen, I've done a lot of work on civil liberties and civil rights. And I think one of the reasons I am so passionate about free speech and the First Amendment is that my father's brother was called before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and he gave an impassioned defense of the First Amendment, and he was my mentor, George Murphy. And so I am very concerned about civil liberties, our right to due process, our freedom of speech, our freedom to worship. And whenever a country is in a crisis, it seems like the first thing lawmakers of any party want to do is to limit our liberties. And, I think in the case of a pandemic, it's different than in a case of 9/11. I think in 9/11, people were so terrified that there was going to be another set of attacks that they said, okay, look at my email, listen to my cell phones, don't get a warrant, just stop, just protect me. And in a pandemic, I think the fear is a little different. There are so many people out there who unfortunately don't fear catching a virus, that they want their liberty at any cost, and they don't understand that sometimes other values in society that make us a functional society, like assuring public health, can trump, no pun intended, can trump other values like freedom of movement, freedom to travel. And so I think what's important in this crisis is to be able to talk about those things in a non-volatile way, and to say, whether certain measures are temporary and how certain measures are going to be enforced, whether they're going to be enforced fairly. I think we can have crises that require temporary restrictions on liberty, but we also have to be sure we have watchdogs in place, organizations like I used to work for, like the ACLU and other organizations, to make sure that the the limitations are temporary, they're fair, they're well explained, and they're appealable if necessary.
You know, one of the things related to that question and your reply to it, Laura, is the fact that for some of us, you know, you chose a career of lobbying. I chose a career basically of advocacy. For some of us in these times of crisis, difficulty, also opportunity, as we've had with women being elected to office, there are important choices each of us makes on how to participate in the government's work and in politics. And I'm wondering whether you could share with us how it was that you came to the conclusion, at least for many years, that you would be a lobbyist, that you would work with members of Congress, with presidential candidates, and with the White House, and how you kept your head about you, how you kept your sanity when it at times must be very difficult to do that, not to say right now.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm, consulting with tech companies, Facebook and Airbnb, but I chose lobbying because I actually love elected officials. I love people who put themselves out there to make a case for the greater good, who want to serve the public interest. And I think there are so many decent people who run for public office and are in public office. I tend to give elected officials a lot of the benefit of the doubt. I know it's cool now to put them down and to hate them, but because I had so many members of my own family run for public office, I saw the good in what they were trying to do. They were trying to bring fairness and justice and inclusion to the body politic that didn't exist before they ran. And even if they didn't win, they paved the way for other candidates to win. Just as Shirley Chisholm, I hope, paves the way for a woman to win, the White House, but she serves as an example to other women to run for Congress. And so I also, because there were so many elections that were lost, because I love politics, I decided I did not want to be a candidate, but I wanted to support candidates and understand what made a candidate successful. And so lobbying, I went from supporting individual candidates like Perrin Mitchell and Shirley Chisholm, two members of Congress, to supporting, the whole Congress, and by providing them information on civil liberties and civil rights. And so I felt like I was doing public service work without the loss of personal privacy that goes along with being a political candidate. I mean, I lived under a microscope as a kid. I wasn't allowed to hang out with kids. I wasn't allowed to go certain places because of how it would look and what impact it could possibly have on my parents or my brothers. And so I did not want to be restrained in that way, but I still wanted to participate. And I love political candidates. I love political people. So for me, lobbying was natural. I wanted to go talk to them. I believe in the power of relationship and in the power of persuasion. And that's one of the things that I learned so much from Shirley Chisholm. She was disarmingly charming in an interpersonal setting. She could get information out of mostly her male colleagues like nobody's business. She could tell you who was having an affair, who was having financial problems, who was getting ready for political leadership and vote against a bill, because they all trusted her and confided her, and she had a lot of integrity, but she had a lot of concern about her fellow male and female colleagues. And so seeing how she operated in a very humane, compassionate way, but still not losing any of her principles, not losing her force, it told me, I could do this. I could get out there and sell an issue really hard. The way Shirley Chisholm sold her colleagues on, providing more more respect for domestic workers and, dealing with domestic violence and all of the issues she worked on, dealing with people who were involuntarily committed to mental institutions. She sold her colleagues on why these issues were important. She made them real. And so I like doing that kind of work. I like the hand-to-hand combat of, the hand-to-hand interaction of dealing with a different member of Congress on one issue and another member of Congress on another, and trying to keep my integrity and while doing it. And the fun part was I did not have worked for any organization that had a political action committee. So all I could do was sell people on the principles. I could not sell people based on, some contribution to their campaign. And so I was in a class of lobbyists that were kind of free from the political pressure and the partisan pressure. And I could just go straight to them on the issues. And a lot of them were very, very relieved to talk to somebody who they didn't have to sell in order to, get a campaign contribution out of them. They didn't have to meet with them because they had money. So I loved what I did. I wish more people who had values and principles like the ones we all share went into that line of work, because we really need them at the table.
And you made a really important distinction there about working for an organization that doesn't have a PAC. It certainly enables people who are really motivated by the issues to do as you did, which is just go full force.
Yeah, and I see a lot of nonprofits trying to start political action committees. And believe me, it was discussed at the ACLU when I was there, and I was dead set against it. But a lot of nonprofits feel like they don't get enough access if they don't have a political action committee. And I just think you have to be more creative. Right.
So one of the things when you're talking about, like Shirley Chisholm being a role model and the elections in your immediate family that were lost, but maybe paved the way for something. I've seen an interview with you where you say that justice is a long game. And I feel like right now, everything feels so immediate, so urgent. We've got to tackle this right now. If we aren't successful right now, what does that mean? So can you talk to us some about that idea that justice is a long game, that we need to be thinking long term, and how we can do that and sort of take the wins as they come without getting too discouraged by the losses?
I just think the only antidote to our sense of grief about the slowness of change is to read history. And if, for example, this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, and do you know that women worked 100 years to get that right? I mean, you know how many we had over a century of slavery in this country before we passed the 13th Amendment in, 1865? Outlawing slavery. I mean, I just think we are kidding ourselves if we think gains are immediate. And so, Rebecca's a gardener and I'm a gardener. You gather your seeds the year before,
right?
And you plant next year. And not every seed you plant blooms, right? But you keep planting seeds because on balance, you will get a crop. And so I just think we are so outcome driven that, Hillary, it's about Hillary winning. It's about more than Hillary winning. It's important, that whether a female candidate wins or loses, I don't want to discount that. And the huge difference between getting Hillary and Trump. But it's also important that we are constantly planting seeds and that we are thinking long term and not just short term, that we are, raising battalions of activists, getting these kids involved as soon as they're interested. I just think if we look at history, we'll get a lot of comfort, and it will be very sobering how slow it took things to change. And if you're African American like I am, you look at the fact that you got the 13th Amendment passed in 1865, and then you got the 15th Amendment that gave African American males the right to vote in 1870. And pretty much there were a few years where Black people could vote in this country, Black men in particular. It took up until 1965, the Voting Rights Act, for the majority of Black people to get the vote in the United States because of these Jim Crow restrictive laws, literacy tests. And it didn't affect all African Americans, but it affected most African Americans who lived in the Deep South. And, it doesn't stop me from saying the Pledge of Allegiance or singing the national anthem, but it does tell me that a lot of that is aspirational because true equality hasn't gotten here yet. And it comes in fits and starts, and it comes in stages. If we are going to lead, we must be optimistic, or we need to go sit down, because we cannot inspire anyone if we don't believe that change is possible. But we cannot mislead people to say change is guaranteed or change is going to happen tomorrow.
I'm so glad you said this and that Kelly asked that question, because I find myself, as I know you do, when I'm talking with younger women, sharing with them stories about, what life was like in the political world when you and I started working. And you told one of those stories before, and we've all got them. And today that would be unthinkable. So, there is progress both on the larger level, as you discussed, but also in this personal experience we have and the opportunity we have. So saying to people, well, if you occasionally get discouraged, look at this history. We have progressed forward, albeit somewhat slowly.
And the biggest problem, Rebecca, that I have is not with people who get discouraged, because we all do get discouraged. The problem I have is with people who try to discourage other people. If you're discouraged and you need to drop out for a minute or, retire from politics, you have the perfect right to do it. But the people who are constantly giving each other cynical messages, I think, do a lot of harm. And we have to tell stories of triumph. And because, like I said, you cannot do this work without having a level of optimism, because if you don't have optimism, you're not going to inspire anybody. Right. And so the cynics are the ones I try to stay away from, because they're just not good for my health.
You mentioned that you didn't yourself want to be an elected official. You didn't want to run for office, and I think there are a lot of us who think about that, should I run for office? Should that be the thing I do? Can you talk some about being a role model for women who want to have leadership positions that can affect politics, but don't necessarily want to go, run for office themselves, and sort of what your advice is?
Oh, there are just so many jobs out there for women to offer leadership that don't involve actually running for office. Certainly, women raise money. Certainly, women register people to vote. Certainly, women, become staff directors of important and powerful committees where they make political decisions sometimes that are more important than a freshman congressman can make. Because of the positions they hold. There are women who are heads of nonprofit organizations who can hire lobbyists and policy people. There's expertise that you can offer candidates, like, I think of people like Celinda Lake and, polling and that sort of thing. So there are a tremendous number of career opportunities that are integral to the solid functioning of a political operation that women can and should pursue.
And in that context, as we close, can you share with us, or we all, I think, have some more time to reflect and perhaps to read, and you mentioned the importance of knowing history before. Can we close with your sharing with us any thoughts about great women leaders we ought to learn more about besides Shirley Chisholm, or books to read that will both inspire and educate?
There was an exhibit about the suffragette movement that just came down, but I just ordered the book from it. It was at the National Portrait Gallery, which is part of the Smithsonian. So you can look it up on the Smithsonian website, I think. And this book gave this exhibit gave a more full-bodied flavor, because a lot of the stories about suffragettes, really only talk about the white women, right. And it didn't tell about the interplay between African-American women leaders and white women leaders, and the issues around race and the issues around gender. And I think that this exhibit and the book that this exhibit produced would be very important. Our book club is reading a book by Polly Murray, who was a very unsung civil rights activist. It's about her family history. So I think Polly Murray is somebody people should study. I think that, Constance Baker Motley, who was one of the first African-American female federal judges, anything that's written about her, she was just totally mind-blowing. And I'm pointing out these women because in these stories, because of the number of obstacles they overcame. And because I think when you see how hard, that you see that when women go through these periods, dark periods in their lives, where they've, had these setbacks, and then they've come out on the other side with stuff that's even greater. I just think, we tend to idealize people, and we don't understand that they have setbacks and heart like the rest of us, but they hang in there. Mm-hmm. And so I think everything that we read about powerful women, we will learn how they hung in there. And just look at Hillary Clinton, and that she's standing tall and doing her thing, mm-hmm. and going to say and talk whatever she feels like talking and nobody's going to stop her, and no man can shut her up. And so I just think we need to tell those stories. I think biography in general is very good for political people, whether it's a biography of Abraham Lincoln or a biography of Lyndon Baines Johnson or a biography of Barbara Jordan. I just think when we read about people in politics, we'll see their humanity more than if we just go on what right.
And then there's always Unbought and Unbossed for those who may not have read it, which certainly was an inspiration to many of us, which Shirley Chisholm wrote at a formative point in her life. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to be with you, and we hope we have a chance to come back and visit with you. So thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe and healthy, and let's hope that we form a better union coming out of this pandemic.
Exactly.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.